So I now have some basic functionality for my campaign contract, and I just tested it out inside of Remix to ensure I'm going down the right path. The next thing I'm going to work on is to implement the idea of a spending request. And as I say this, I just realized that there's a few charts that I need to pull up so that we can go over some of the concepts here. So let me pull this up now. I usually do this before video, but sometimes I do it in the middle of the video. And so let me just go ahead and do it before I continue talking. All right. So I'm going to implement the spending request, and I have the ability to recruit people or accept contributions, but I don't yet have the ability to send the money out. So right now, I can't use any of the money that I'm receiving yet. And that is the purpose of the request. So remember, a manager, so actually I should be showing these to you now. So this is what I'm referring to, the requests here. Okay, and so a manager is going to call the create request function, and that should create a new spending request. Okay, the request variable was going to be an array that holds a list of individual requests. So let's talk about what the request array is going to be in terms of its actual type or data structure. For that, I'm going to offer a quick refresher utilizing a chart that I presented several videos ago, which is this one. So here's a chart of all the different reference types available inside of Solidity. We've made extensive use of dynamic arrays so far, and there are also fixed arrays, mappings, and structs. So mappings and structs are vaguely similar in that they are both collections of key value pairs. Mapping is about storing very similar records, whereas the purpose of a struct is to model some given object. An example is creating a struct that represents a car, and a car may have a make, model, and value assigned to it. So I'm going to create a new struct inside my contract that will be called request. And this struct will have a couple of, excuse me, a couple of different fields that will describe the purpose of the request. So allow me to present another diagram that's going to help us understand this request struct that I'm going to make. So here's the request struct, and these are names of the different fields that I'm going to place in the struct, and each field has its own individual type and its own purpose. So I'm going to create a new type called request. And anytime a manager wants to create a new request, they're going to be creating a new instance of this struct. The struct is like a class of sorts where we have to first create an instance of it to use it. Okay. And that's a very, very important point. So we have to create a new instance of it to use it. So let's talk about each field and why I'm using them. So description, where's my, I was looking at my cursor. So description is to explain to contributors why the money is being spent. A manager might give a request, a description of pay a vendor for shipping or battery casings. So this is the area that a manager can use to justify the expense to all the contributors. Number two is value. So value is an unsigned int that will represent the amount of money the manager wants to send over to a vendor. Three, recipient. So recipient will be the address of the vendor, the person who will receive some amount of money. In theory, all approvers can look at the recipient property and confirm whether the manager really is buying LED screens or battery casings. Four, complete. The interesting thing about the request is we don't have a great way of knowing if it's been executed. So I'm going to add a simple Boolean that says whether or not the request has been voted on, approved, and have the money sent out. If the request is marked as complete, it will not be sent out again. A new request would have to be made. 5. So I'm going to also need some type of voting mechanism. That's the entire point of this application. Manager makes a request and the contributors votes on whether to approve or disapprove of the request. So I'm going to come back to this topic later because it does require its own explanation. So I'm going to head back to Remix now. We're done with the explanation. And I'm going to define the struct at the top of the campaign like so. So I'll say struct request. And inside, I'm going to list a variable type like so. So I'll say string. And this is description is the first one. Description. Okay. And this defines a new field on the struct called description. And as you might guess, it sets the type to be a string. I can repeat the same process for all the other fields that I want to add. And do take note that I'm placing a semicolon after each individual field as opposed to a comma. So this is distinctly different from JavaScript objects. So no commas here, semicolons instead. All right, so here goes. So uint, it's going to be value, address, this recipient, and bool, which is going to be complete. All right, I'm going to separate that. Okay. All right, so I want to be clear that these variables below the struct here, they created variables that we can get access to anywhere in the contract. However, a struct is a struct definition. This does not create an instance of a request. We cannot go into a function and access struct definitions. When we create struct definitions, we're creating a brand new type into our contract the same way we have type of address, uint, and array of address. It's a type, not an instance of a variable. When we want to make a new request, then we create a new variable and say it's a type of request. And so we can have as many requests as we want because all I did was define the idea of a request. So in a subsequent video, I'm going to start implementing some of the logic to allow a manager to actually create a request. See you then.